What happens when a hurricane isn't the worst thing to hit your house? In 2004, Teri Helfrich and her husband Charles Brandt evacuated their beachside home to stay with family in Orlando. A little forced family bonding, a few too many drinks, it could have been an awkward anecdote for the next reunion. Instead, it unraveled into something far darker. By the end of the week, 3 people were dead, and police uncovered a past that Charles had spent decades hiding. A past that made everything make sense in the worst possible way. This isn't just a story about what happened. It's about what no one wanted to believe could happen. But before we get into that story, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you found the right podcast. Tap the follow button now for access to at least 2 episodes per week. Welcome to 10 Minute Murder. Let's get into it. In 1986, Teri Helfrich found what many spend a lifetime searching for, a love that felt like home. Teri was that cliché, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered, a free spirit with a knack for making friends. Her warmth was magnetic. When she crossed paths with Charles Brandt, or Charlie as he preferred, her world shifted. Charlie was her opposite in so many ways, reserved, bookish, and steady. Where Teri brought vibrancy and spontaneity, Charlie added structure and calm. Their differences weren't obstacles, they were puzzle pieces, fitting together in a way that just made sense. Friends and family marveled at their connection. It wasn't just the way they looked at each other, it was the way they lived for one another. Whether it was Charlie learning to love Teri's zest for life, or Teri respecting Charlie's quiet demeanor, they met in the middle with ease. Their wedding was intimate, just a handful of witnesses and an exchange of vows that needed no embellishment. Shortly after, the couple settled into a dreamy beach house on Big Pine Key, Florida. Life was golden. Warm breezes, sandy beaches, and a future as bright as the Florida sun. At least, that is how it seemed. Life on Big Pine Key was idyllic for Teri and Charles, until September 2004, when Hurricane Ivan loomed large on the horizon. The fierce storm didn't just threaten their charming beachside home, it cast a shadow of danger over their lives. Enter Michelle Jones, Teri's 37-year-old niece, a successful TV executive living alone in Orlando. Michelle wasn't just family, she was the glue that kept everyone connected. Daily phone calls and close-knit bonds defined her relationships. So when she heard about the hurricane barreling toward her aunt and uncle's home, Michelle didn't hesitate. She opened her door and her heart, inviting them in to ride out the storm safely with her. Teri and Charles arrived in early September, grateful for Michelle's generosity. Ever the hostess, Michelle turned what could have been a harrowing evacuation into something almost celebratory. She called up friends and family, transforming her home into a hub of warmth and connection. For a while, it seemed as if the storm's disruption had brought everyone closer. But by the evening of September 13th, the mood shifted. The vibes were off. With the storm behind them, Teri and Charles were technically free to return home. Still, Charles wanted to stay one more night. Dinner was fish he'd cooked himself, paired with enough drinks to blur the lines of their usual dynamic. When Michelle's friend, Lisa Emmons, called to check in and propose a visit, Michelle waved her off. Charles and Teri, she explained, weren't themselves. The couple, typically loving and grounded, had begun fighting, something entirely out of character for them. Michelle told Lisa it wasn't the right time for company and decided to head to bed, leaving the evening and its tensions unresolved. Lisa took Michelle's advice, and the night continued without her. What should have been the end of an ordinary evening marked the beginning of something unimaginable. When Michelle Jones stopped answering her phone, her family's unease quickly turned to alarm. For Michelle's mother, Mary Lou, communication was the cornerstone of their bond. Living in North Carolina, those near-daily calls kept the distance between them bearable. Quote, "We called Monday night and Tuesday night. Each time, it went straight to voicemail. By Wednesday, the eerie silence was too much to ignore. Determined to uncover what was wrong, Mary Lou reached out to Debbie Knight, one of Michelle's other close friends, and asked her to check in on Michelle. Debbie wasted no time. When she arrived at Michelle's Orlando home, something felt off immediately. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The front door was locked, so Debbie made her way around to the garage. Through the distorted glass of the garage door, she spotted something that made her stomach drop. Pushing the door open, she was met with a gruesome sight. A body hanging from the rafters, decomposing in the Florida heat. It was Charles. Debbie fled in terror, dialing 911 as she ran. When the police arrived, the scene inside was just as devastating. Lead investigator Rob Himmertz later described it. It was just a nice home. It had that feminine kind of feel to it. All those nice decorations and the aroma of her home was masked by death, the smell of death. In the living room, Teri's body was found on the couch. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. The attack was brutal but swift. Death came quickly for Teri. Michelle's bedroom told a far darker story. The violence she endured defied comprehension. She had been decapitated and disemboweled. Her heart had been removed, and her head was deliberately placed beside her body, a macabre arrangement that suggested something deeply personal, even ritualistic. The evidence painted a grim picture. Charles had turned on Teri first, stabbing her multiple times in a sudden act of violence. He then attacked Michelle, inflicting horrors beyond the scope of mere rage. Finally, consumed by whatever drove him to commit such acts, Charles tied bed sheets to the rafters in the garage and took his own life. The home, once a place of safety and family, now stood as a haunting reminder of the unspeakable. Yet the question remained, why? What could have driven Charles to such brutality? This was only the beginning of a story that would reveal even darker truths. At first glance, the sequence of events in Michelle Jones's home seemed tragically straightforward. Charles Brandt had first turned on his wife, Teri, stabbing her to death. Then he attacked Michelle with violence before taking his own life in the garage. The why, however, was far less clear. The answer would come from his older sister, Angela, whose revelations would not only explain the events of that night, but expose a dark truth about Charles's past. In a police interview, Angela recounted a night in 1968 that changed her family forever. Charles was just 13 when he unleashed a wave of violence in their Texas home. The family had just returned from a 2-week vacation, and the evening seemed routine. Their father, Herbert, was shaving in the bathroom, while their mother, Lisa, heavily pregnant, soaked in the tub. Without warning, Charles burst into the bathroom armed with a hunting rifle. Angela recalled her father shouting, "Charlie, stop," before a deafening bang silenced him. Herbert was critically wounded, leaving him defenseless as Charles turned the gun on Lisa. He shot her multiple times, killing both her and the unborn child. Next, Charles turned this weapon on Angela, but when he pulled the trigger, the gun misfired. In that split second, Angela fought back, physically grappling with her younger brother while trying to calm him. She later described Charles as being in a trance, his eyes glassy and detached, as if they weren't fully present. Gradually, as she pleaded with him, she saw the trance break, and Charles stopped fighting. Angela managed to escape to a neighbor's house, but before she could get help, Charles himself arrived at the neighbor's door. Calmly, he confessed, "I just shot my mom and dad." Herbert survived the attack and identified Charles as the perpetrator. But Texas law at the time didn't allow for a child of Charles's age to be tried for murder. Instead, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital for just 1 year before being released back into his father's custody. The family never spoke of the incident again. Herbert moved them to Florida, remarried, and told Charles's younger siblings, who were too young to remember, that their mother had died in a car accident. For decades, the truth lay buried, only resurfacing after Charles's violent rampage in 2004. With this chilling history in hand, investigators began to suspect that the events at Michelle's home weren't isolated. A search of Charles and Teri's Big Pine Key residence revealed a disturbing cache of snuff films, suggesting a fascination with violence that went far beyond the ordinary. Not that a fascination with violence is ordinary. Their suspicions deepened as they revisited cold cases in the area, ultimately uncovering a shocking connection. In 1989, the body of 38-year-old Sherry Perisho was found floating near Charles's home. Her throat had been slashed, her head nearly severed, and her heart removed. Details eerily similar to Michelle's murder. Charles' wife, Teri, had harbored her own suspicions about him. She once confided to her brother-in-law that Charles had come home one night covered in blood. He claimed it was from gutting fish, but Teri was not convinced, especially after Sherry's mutilated body was discovered so close to their home. Years later, in 2006, investigators confirmed what Teri had feared. Charles had murdered Sherry. But this wasn't an isolated act. The investigation revealed connections between Charles Brandt and several unsolved cases, like the 1978 murder of Carol Sullivan. The 12-year-old was abducted while waiting for her school bus. Her skull was later found in a bucket, but her body was never recovered. In 1988, Lisa Saunders. At just 20 years old, Lisa was brutally murdered in a case with striking similarities to Sherry's death. In 1995, Darlene Toller, a sex worker found wrapped in a blanket along a highway. Her throat had been slashed in a manner consistent with Charles's known methods. Each case bore hallmarks to Charles's signature brutality: extreme violence, deliberate mutilation, and an unsettling focus on the removal of vital organs. With Sherry's murder confirmed and strong circumstantial evidence linking him to the others, investigators began to see Charles Brandt for what he truly was: a serial killer hiding in plain sight. His crimes spanned decades, targeting vulnerable women and leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. For those who knew him, the revelations were almost impossible to reconcile with the quiet, bookish man they thought they understood. Yet the truth of Charles Brandt's life was far darker and more monstrous than anyone could have imagined. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe. I'm the host, and thank you for taking the time to listen. Subscribe if you are new here. Sorry, I didn't mean to shout at you. Subscribe if you are new here. And if you are not new here, if you consider yourself an OG listener, that is, you've made it through most of the episodes, if not all of them. And some of you, by the way, have made it through all of them multiple times. You've emailed to tell me about it, and I'm impressed, first of all, but I don't know how you find the time to do that. Yes, I do, because I do the same thing. I binge through so many different documentaries and TV shows. By the way, I've watched the first episode only at this point of Dexter, the new Dexter, and it seems to be very good. But yeah, I do the same thing. So yeah, if you're an OG listener, thank you for being such a steadfast listener of this podcast, and thank you for sharing it with your friends and family and anyone else that you think could be into brief stories about true crime. If you want to reach out to me, my email address is joe@10minutemurder.com. And of course, the website, 10minutemurder.com, has all the information about the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.